We are going to kick off the panels today with a panel that's called, as you see from the slide, Defending the Humanities Across the Divide. I've been told from some of the panelists that we expect this to be a little contentious. Going to be a little debate here. Good way to start the morning. I think that it's important to note that this panel came out of some conversations that we had with our work with the advisory committee back in fall 2022, and indeed some members of the advisory committee are here on this panel. One of the things that the committee talked about was the different ways that community colleges can celebrate and defend the humanities to students, to parents, to employers, obviously really germane to Paula's keynote just now, and to the public. Many faculty want to promote the humanities for the field's intrinsic value and the joy of the life of the mind. But emphasizing career skills, as we know all too well, learning humanities disciplines is equally essential. So our panel today is going to feature panelists who will discuss how best to strike a balance between promoting the marketable skills of humanities education and advocating for appreciation of those disciplines for their own sake. And some may say that the divide doesn't really exist at all, and we want to hear more about that. So I'm going to turn it over to Matthew Reed, who's the Senior Executive Officer at the New Jersey Council of County Colleges, who's going to moderate the session and introduce the panelists.
Good morning. Paula, I loved the Jersey Girl moment in your talk when you said, move over. I think that's a really nice theme for the humanities right now, telling the other fields, move over. We're important. Thank you for being here, everybody. The humanities are close to my heart. I studied political philosophy in graduate school, got a PhD in the canon of Western thought from Plato to NATO. And anyone who does that and then looks for a job understands what the divide is. So I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to introduce the panelists. I will keep it short on my behalf. We have a philosopher, an English professor, and a historian. They'll be talking about the difference between, I guess, the humanities and what my friend Ann Hoffman calls the gerund majors, engineering, nursing, majors that end in ings. These majors do not end in ings, but each will bring their own perspective. Leading off, Giuseppe Rotolo, professor of philosophy from Middlesex.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? I know my students always tell me I have a soft voice, so I want to make sure that everybody is there. So, usually when it comes to defending the humanities across any divide, the first thing that comes to mind seems to be those majors. Seems to be this, let's call it competition that we have with the sciences. And it's been years, in fact, that we keep on hearing that, if you want to be successful in life, whatever that means, you need to go into a STEM career. And while this narrative is annoying, and it is dangerous in my opinion, not just for the humanities, but for the students as well, for the reasons that Paula told us, this is not going to be my main concern today, actually. I'm not worried about that at all. Today I'm worried about something different. I'm worried specifically about the much more perilous idea, I believe, that the main goal of higher education in general and the humanities has to, and especially for community colleges, has to be workforce development. This idea, in fact, I think is dangerous for the humanities for obvious reasons, and also because it threatens, I believe, it threatens to destroy whatever good is left of our educational system. I believe truly that if we're not careful with this, if we're not cautious, this will lead us to a future where colleges and university will be pretty much irrelevant. And I know that I'm using a strong word here, and I know that we're all thinking probably about, what are you talking about? We're always done workforce development. This is what we do, right? But I am really concerned about this because even though this is nothing new, now I feel that there is a push for workforce development to become the things that we do mainly, if not solely. And this is worrisome. However, whenever I pose these questions to my administrator friends, or not so much friends, but whatever, the administrators in my community, I usually get three kinds of answers. The first is, well, Giuseppe, you are, as much as we like discussing concepts like justice or beauty, well, everyone needs to work. People need to make a living. And I call this argument the AKA, well, college is just training for work. You need to get over with this idea that those other things are important. The other answer that I get is like, well, that it's kind of what Paula was saying. We don't need any mini Giuseppe going on, right? We need people that engage in jobs that are in non-academic sectors, right? Most people might think that philosophy, history, English, languages are interesting, but very few will become historians or philosophers. There is much more demand for electricians than there is for academics, right? And this argument I call the AKA, you're not that relevant really. You're just those frills which we were talking about. And finally, the third one is, which seems a little bit in contradiction with the second one, is the argument that says, well, the humanities are in fact workforce development. Employers value the soft skill that the humanities help students to develop. We need to make the skills more explicit and everything will be all right. So don't worry, everything is going to be fine. When I reason about these things, these are the answer that I sometimes give to them, or sometimes I just think in my head. I think this is a good place to just say what I think, in a sense. So to the question, to the idea that everyone needs to work, right? Well, college cannot be purely or mainly training for work. Otherwise, we are creating a class of people that exist just in preparation of this thing that is work. And this cannot be all, right? There should be more to college. College should be formative, of course, but also transformative. If there is no transformation there, what are we even doing? I don't even know. College should expose people to what they do not know, not to what they know. It should prepare them to become who they are or who they want to be. It shouldn't just prepare them to perform a task. This is where innovation comes from, by the way, right? This is where new possibilities are born. I feel that if we intend this workforce development narrowly, which is the feeling that I have, we're going to get just more of the same. College will become just reactionary rather than progressive. It will react to the market constantly because we're going to chase those jobs that are in need at the moment. It's going to become reactionary to the status quo rather than leading the way, rather than showing possibilities, rather than making sure that people think of alternatives rather than just staying with whatever is there already. And by the way, again, this is where real innovation comes from. Real innovation happens when we radically rethink what we have already, what we're doing, when we constantly test whatever is going on, the theories that we have, the objects that we have, our preconceived notions, and we all know this. I mean, I'm assuming that we have a room more or less full of humanists one way or another, so I'm not telling you anything new. These are all things that you know. But now we should know also that people that are just trained to work they might not develop the ability to actually go for this kind of innovations. And we may end up being stuck with somebody who doesn't have the training or is not used to worry about these things. This ambiguity which we were talking about before. This idea that one question might have many answers, or there are many more questions that can be asked about the same thing. The humanities provide, among other things, the critical voice necessary to create changes in the scientific community, in the technical realm, and of course, in the social and political sphere. And this is not secondary to what we do. This is what we do. We create innovation and change. Otherwise, we become China, where we do things, where we all work, but innovation needs to come from somewhere else, right? And the fact that, I'm going to argue something that's probably one of the things that we're going to disagree on, that the fact that this critical thinking aspect is not made explicit, it's part of the methodology that transforms students. Because all of a sudden, just by doing, Aristotle used to say, you learn to play the lyra by playing the lyra. If you want to teach the students to read between the lines, to understand things, we need to expose them exactly to that. We cannot just tell them, hey, by the way, this is what we're doing. They need to be doing this. And not telling them is part of the methodology, at least in my discipline. But I'm a philosopher, don't listen to me. The second point, right? The fact that we need workers in non-academic sectors, and the fact that there is much more demand for electricians than academics. Well, I will argue that this is a problem of the market, not a problem of the humanities, and not a problem of college. I mean, there must be a reason why people do not want to do certain jobs, because let's face it, the issue is that people don't want to go in certain careers anymore. And why is the reason? What is the reason for it? Why is that? Well, maybe the jobs are not paid well. Maybe they're not fulfilling. And those things are important, both of them. So maybe the market should look into this, and we shouldn't just bend over backwards to kind of allow our students to be prey of corporation that are looking for cheap labor. Maybe we need to do something else. We need to have higher standards for our students, because it's obvious, I believe, whenever we look at things, that today companies are lobbying for more workforce-oriented education. Today, politicians are being lobbied to pass regulation to hollow academic institutions, especially the ones that deal in lower-class students like ours. Today is when institutions that should be academic are guided, presided, directed by individuals that do not have an academic background, but come from corporate or labor sometimes backgrounds. And by the way, this is the way the humanities, culture, any form of dissent, and democracy end up dying if we do this, if we let this happen. I mean, I know you might think I'm exaggerating, but as was mentioned before, this is happening, and this is happening for real. In Maryland, Utah, and Pennsylvania, now there's a fourth one that I didn't see that one. They're eliminating any sort of degree requirement to work for the state. And knowing how many battles are fought at the state level, knowing that these are the people that really make a difference in everyday life of citizens, this is scary. Because this will lead us to be completely irrelevant again. Training practically, these people think, is more important than studying. And this is the first step, right? College, if we go this direction, will become absolutely irrelevant, in my opinion. The third, I'm gonna go back. The third point will be that the humanities are in fact a form of workforce development, right? That was the third argument that I hear all the time. And that we need to make the skills more explicit and everything will be okay. Well, I claim that the humanities cannot be just this. Simply because, yes, we do this thing, but this is kind of secondary for us. This comes with the territory. And the moment the next crisis comes, this is the first fat that's going to get trimmed, right? Because it's the secondary things. Well, the skills are important, but these are not the only things that we need. We need more basic stuff, right? This famous skills our employer want also are not developed with work in mind. And I think that the slides that Paula showed before, saying that, you know, humanities students are not that bad compared to others, to other majors rather, when it comes to employment, when it comes to satisfaction with the job that they have. The fact that this is happening is telling us that we're doing something right. And the problem is the funding. The problem is caring for these things rather than anything else. The skills, by the way, are developed in the transformation process that the humanities jumpstart in the individual. If we change this process to the development of a worker, the skills become just performance. They're not authentic anymore. They lose the value that they have. Well-rounded individuals are such if and only if they're not constantly being trained to be a worker, because otherwise everything becomes a performance. Everything becomes just a task. Now, when I give the answer to my well-intentioned administrators, usually the answer back that I get is the following. It's like, okay, let's assume you're wrong, but let's assume you're right. What can I do to ease your worries? What can the college do to make sure that you're not so worried about this whole thing going on? And I don't know if this is just a way of telling me, like, listen, there's nothing you can do, this is the way it is. But I truly believe that they're offering help somehow. So here is a brief, I promise you, list of practical things that we can do that will make me feel better, and I think will make also a difference. First of all, we can explicitly state that our colleges believe and promote a humanistic education, that they believe the transformative value of education and not just in its formative function. And this is easy to do and doesn't cost a penny. But it's something on paper that says that we are valuable for the place where we work in. Secondly, I'd admit a slightly more expensive thing to do would be to invest explicitly resources in the academic side of the house. This could mean, for example, clearly and explicitly state how much of the budget of a college or any external contribution are used to foster the academic side of the house versus the workforce development side. Maybe this means to create rules or a rule that says that for every dollar donated, invested, given in any way, shape, or form to a college, at least X percentage of it needs to go towards the academic goals of the college. Or maybe this means clearly reserve a specific percentage of the budget exclusively to it. If you ask me what areas of investment I'm talking about, well, we can finance innovative programs. We can advertise the humanities a little bit better. For example, instead of advertising welding all the time, we can advertise things like philosophy, history, literature, and stuff like that. We can create opportunities that clearly put the humanities in the front and center of the life of the college. Think of what we're doing today, or think of maybe of a open house where parents and prospective students are invited to join a humanities class, or maybe more than a humanities class, and go around and to see for themselves what these things are. Maybe we can invite throughout the academic year high school students to participate in some of our classes. And of course, this costs money, right? And this means that our institution that employs us needs to invest in this by paying for whatever is needed to organize such events, paying the people that are involved in doing this, and so on. Finally, another practical thing is that maybe sometimes we need to say no to politicians or any external institutions, maybe sometimes even to the NJCCC, right? If what they're saying furthers ideas that might conflict with the true mission of our colleges, that should be, again, not just to form students, but to transform them. And finally, I think that we are really, really at a crossroad here. And we are uniquely, historically positioned, I want to say, to make a decision here. If we want to be Marco Rubio and side with him, or if we want to just side with John Adams, right? And this is especially important because of our specific students population, the students that we serve in community colleges. We have to decide if students that come from lower classes, first-generation students, immigrant students, minority students have the right to start their dream and to follow the path indicated by Adams, or if we want to make sure that they are indefinitely our source of cheap labor. Thank you. Right there.
Thank you, Giuseppe. When Karin and Valerie asked for suggestions for who would make sense for this panel, our next speaker's name was literally the first that popped out of my mouth. Bettina and I worked together at DeVry back in the 90s, trying to teach liberal arts courses to students who had picked DeVry so they wouldn't have to take liberal arts courses. And I couldn't think of anyone more qualified to speak to the divide and the struggle and the possibilities than Dr. Bettina Calori, professor of English at Mercer.
Thank you, Matt. And I should say and add to that I went to Williams College, which is something that Matt and I share in common, so was really completely immersed in the liberal arts kind of world. And DeVry was a completely different world. And actually, the talk I want to give you now originates really in the last 17 years of my life at Mercer County Community College. So I've been there a really long time. Although not as long as other people who've been there. I actually want to talk to you about how we make students and eventually the general public, because that's what they become, realize the absolutely symbiotic relationship between the humanities and other fields. So for example, I want to tell you about what I do in my English 102 course. Well, I've done it once, to be truthful. This is a recent experiment. What I did was I want them to interact with powerful data in order to discover its limits, right? So I asked them to go use and discover the climate and economic justice screening tool. Do you know what? I think maybe I will stand up. Sorry, this is the way I'm prepped. Will I be able to advance slides from here?
I think you can
Yeah,
take this.
I'll take it that way. Sorry. Yeah. So I asked students to interact with this gigantic compilation of data, right? And if you see the image of the map, but it's the kind of map that you can zoom in on. You can click and zoom and enlarge and expand, and it's underpinned with huge data sets from the government. The whole purpose of this tool is to help federal monies go to places with greater need, right? That's the purpose of it. And so I asked my students to zoom in and discover the different burdens in different areas. If you look on the side there, you can see it. You can expand climate change, or you can find out an area's burden or vulnerability with respect to housing, or health, or workforce development. And it allows you to zoom down to the census tract level. And once you're there, you can easily see the demographics of that area and also see the scores. Those are all expandable categories, so you can see various scores that tract has in that area. And any score over a 90 is a significant vulnerability. So I asked my students to dive in, and of course they quickly discovered disparities, different kinds of burdens or advantages in our own county. I said, but go beyond that and explore the country. I mean, you can't do the whole country, but certainly go look in areas where you don't know anybody and you've never been, and see what you see. So they did that for a while. And just a second. I was telling people, this is like, I haven't been in a public conference like this since the pandemic. It's my debut. So they spent some time doing this, and at the end of the time I asked them, okay, so how many of you, after doing this exploration, think that this tool makes you understand something very important about our country? And the room fills with hands, right? So then I said, okay, I'm going to ask a different question. So for those areas that you looked at, the parts where you expanded and looked and drilled down, do you think you understand the people there or the location? And then the hands went down. Because that's a different kind of question and a different kind of understanding, right? And that's my point, right? As powerful as this kind of data is, and it is really powerful, we have the disciplines that can complement it and complete it, and I kind of want to invite you to think about how the discipline you work in would bring history, cultural context, orienting ideas, and this idea of how do we weight the importance of things to data, right? So that's critical, and I want to have you imagine a student in my class who's sitting in front of this tool at his computer with his arms folded, and he said, I just don't see how this would work, right? How's it going to work? It's very theoretical to him. He's looking at this thing which looks like a lot of marketable skills, right? Like if you can build this, if you have any point in the chain of this job chain, you've got a marketable skill. If he's saying, I don't see how it's going to work, he's kind of mired in doubt that the monies will ever come, right? Because it all depends on the complicated chain of human communication and motivating narratives to get all of that done, right? All of this, whatever this is, has to all be rolled into motivating narrative to get us to the next point. So what I want to talk about is, the power of narrative, which is a super important thing that is a superpower of the humanities, and it's something that we have to sensitize our students to. But narratives are really tricky. So I wanted to share this cartoon, which I have to say it's a gem of a cartoon that I got from a professor when I was a graduate student at the University of California, Santa Barbara, in the 1990s, and I think the cartoon is from 1980, but it still delights students today. So I was thinking, how can I very quickly illustrate how powerful a narrative is? I mean, you've read novels and you've read books, so but how do we just bring it up, right? So Jim Davis's cartoon here, I think, does it. So we see Garfield wants to get a chicken. So he tugs on that vine to show us that he's got the tool he's going to need to get it. He swoops down, takes the chicken, and John looks up and says, where did the vine come from, right? And it's a funny cartoon, but also really deep, I think, right? Because right there in the corner, that right-hand corner, is where Davis/Garfield is showing us that whoever gets to construct the story, or however the story gets constructed, determines how the chicken's, where the chicken's gonna go, right? So he happens to have a vine there. Where did the vine come from? Is the vine valid? Do you know what I mean? That's how story works. That's how story works. That's how narrative works. And we are in the human condition of society of constantly having to examine the narratives that we're immersed in critically. And we also have to harness the power of narratives practically, right? And that's what we need to sensitize our students to. So to go back to my class, a different student has zoomed into a certain area, a tract in an area, a census tract area that's showing a huge vulnerability with exposure to lead paint. And he's kind of shaking his head because he's saying, the number is astronomically high, right? He says, you just can't know that is the most important problem that they're dealing with, right? What are you going to do with this number? And what I want to point out is that that's it. That's framing, right? At that point, he's zoomed down to a level where there's one panel. That's the frame. That's the narrative frame right there. That's showing that number. And as long as that's his perspective, that looks like the story, right? And at that point, he's completely immersed in the complexity of telling stories and the competing stories. And that student needs the tools
to navigate storytelling, right? That's where we are. So, AI has already come up. And it always needs to come up. And honestly, even when I said yes to being on this panel, it wasn't as present in everyone's minds. You know, that Chat GPT has just made it explode on the landscape. So what I was going to say was that, you know, this is not the first time in human history that we've had to struggle with dealing with truth values in narratives, right? And yet, I'm an English professor. The early days of the novel, this new genre that kind of mimicked reality but was not history, very suspicious. You know, what is going to happen to the world? So, you know, all right. So people have navigated challenging genres before. But it just keeps getting harder. That's what it feels like, right? So I just think that we are really importantly positioned in the humanities to ask and answer the really important questions. We do have to help our students and society think about how we navigate this media landscape. Recently, I'm actually thinking apocalyptically about what teaching, research, and writing means. Like, is it really writing that I'm teaching? Is it writing that I'm teaching? Because if AI can generate the writing, then maybe it's the spontaneous critical thought that someone utters in class that I know comes from that person. Is that what I'm teaching? I don't know. That's, you know, we're forced to imagine this future and not even knowing, so what are the new genres going to be that we need to teach? And we're right here, we're on, you know, we're community colleges. I'm just going to echo what others have said. We're here on the ground, and it's important work. And I think we're past the moment of trying to defend the humanities. I think we need to go on the offensive.
Thank you, Bettina. In batting cleanup, we have a Bergen Community College history professor, Dr. Sarah Schertz.
Hi. All right, let's see. Can you hear me? Good. All right. We've obviously come down the spectrum, and I will be taking the apparently unpleasant task of defending it as essential skills. So let me start here. Oh, wait a minute. There we go. All right, so I'm obviously speaking to the converted here. We already know the value of the humanities, and we want to promote it, or we wouldn't be in this room. But sometimes even the most passionate defenders have difficulty in putting it into words when we have students sitting in front of us trying to decide between a major in nursing or business that their parents want for them, or one in humanities that they want for themselves. In a world where the cost of higher education has continued to rise and the prospect of a job has continued to sink, this is an important discussion for students, especially in community college where financial pressures can be extreme. The question, what can you do with that major, reflects a realistic concern about preparation for life after college, not a disinterest in the intrinsic value of liberal education. For many students, therefore, choosing courses and majors can't just be about pursuing their intellectual passion. It has to be about developing the skills they need for a career. The good news is, and you have seen better data and prettier charts about half an hour ago, so I apologize for the repeat here. But the reality is, and the good news is, that the study of humanities is not an indulgence of the elite. or a frivolous distraction from career preparation. They won't be left holding signs that say, "We'll philosophize for food." But we need our students to learn to talk about the marketable career essential skills and habits of mind they learn as humanities students so that they can use this vocabulary to talk to employers. This starts by having humanities faculty get comfortable using the language of skills and competencies, not just our content in the classroom, their syllabi, at open houses, and at orientations. And we need to help our colleagues in other disciplines, our administration, our student services, our academic counselors, and our boards of trustees know the kind of essential learning for career and citizenship readiness that the humanities provides, so that the conversation shifts from whether we should be keeping the humanities to why we aren't making them a central foundation for every program at the college. So what skills and habits of mind does the study of humanities teach students? We know these, right? The first is verbal communication. Whether in English or a different world language, we have to be able to exchange our ideas with one another in our classrooms, our workplaces, and our communities. And we need to do so with clarity, often with brevity, and with respect to one another. Those who can most effectively express their ideas, their feelings, their visions, and their expectations while listening to and truly reflecting upon those of others are the ones who will be successful, both working collaboratively and in leadership positions. They also learn how to listen, not just to the spoken words of their peers and professors, but through the written word, to what the author is implying, what the characters are expressing, and what must be inferred from what is left unsaid. And from this model, students learn to speak their own minds, to express themselves, to be clear, convincing, and concise when they do so. Modern language programs, English programs, history, philosophy, cinema, and theater all make this essential skills for any foundation in their instruction. Written communication. Humanities students know the written word is powerful and immortal. Businesses and civic organizations know well-chosen words can command, motivate, instruct, and negotiate. They can heal division, topple regimes, demand justice, and rouse a generation to seek change. Once students learn how to write, they can write about anything. So they can enter any field and write for the sciences, business, technology, arts, and public affairs. And these other fields know that they need good writers and communicators who can explain their research and innovation to the public. Truly, there's no career path, public forum, or private endeavor where being able to master the power of words and communicate ideas effectively in writing will not be an advantage. The next one, empathy. Colleges and employers today are desperate for a generation of leaders who have empathy, but it's a complicated thing to try to teach or even explain. Humanities students know it, they revel in it. Empathy comes from appreciating someone else's perspective and seeking understanding despite difference. Philosophy and religion courses probably most clearly teach these skills as essential elements in their discipline, but storytellers, whether historians or authors of literature, are also naturals at this. In literature, authors have to employ different voices and points of view, develop unique characters with diverse backgrounds that shape them in complex ways, and feel the emotion of all these characters' interactions. Historians' exploration of past lives teaches us to consider multiple perspectives, opinions, approaches, and arguments, and to weigh and challenge what we hear. Historians learn to take into consideration author biases, personal background, social context, and ulterior motives when trying to understand someone. And even when we have an array of perspectives, I'm a historian, I'm sorry, it's going to be a little heavy on this. Historians are taught to still consider what these sources cannot provide, to recognize that much is left unsaid, and to acknowledge that many voices have been lost or silenced over time. We learn to truly listen to ideas that are different from our own, perspectives we might struggle with, and arguments we disagree with. We learn to hear others and understand them and accept them, all skills needed for good citizenship and successful relationships in any career. The next one, creative thinking and innovation. Humanities students are our poets, our novelists, our screenwriters and playwrights, our dreamers and imagineers. Their creations help us explore our emotions, imagine alternative realities, move outside our comfort zones, and think outside the box. We need those who live a life of the mind to contribute their creations to our society as surely as we need new technology and medicine and all the other works of man. But creativity can be beneficial beyond the creation of works of beauty and thought. Humanities students can apply their creative thinking to identifying problems and devising solutions in any career field or public setting. Dreamers who enter another field become visionaries, innovators, entrepreneurs, and problem solvers. The next, appreciation of diversity. Students of history, world languages, world literature, philosophy and religion, theater and art, we all study many regions, both Western and non-Western. We learn to think beyond ourselves and our own experience to those broader communities across time and place. The appreciation we gain for the larger world teaches us to see common ground with others, but also to value and respect what is different. Students who study the broader world's literature, history, religion, thought, and culture learn the importance of exchange, collaboration, and diversity rather than isolation, insularity, or parochialism. A study of the global past also teaches students that people, their behaviors, their laws and customs, structures of power, values and beliefs, they're a product of collective history that can't always be easily altered or replaced. Those who develop an appreciation for cultural differences, who value this exchange and growth, and who understand that a community's past can contribute to influence its people's present, make better global citizens, and better leaders in their respective careers. Information literacy. Here I'm going to use a history as an example again, but I'm sure you can find examples in your disciplines as well. In questioning and searching for answers, a historian finds, reads, and critiques a tremendous amount of material. We must learn to recognize reliable sources, to move beyond the established sources for the information we seek, and to gather evidence systematically, comprehensively, and carefully. Learning to approach questions, research, and reading in this way also makes historians critical consumers of information. They are exacting. They recognize weaknesses and strengths in arguments, and they are quick to challenge inaccuracy, unreliability, or lack of evidence. But historians don't stop at gathering and critiquing information. They also learn to tell its story in an engaging and convincing way. Those who can approach information with a critical eye, consider diverse perspectives on a question, structure an argument, and translate it successfully to diverse audiences are assets to any career. Problem solving and decision making. And again, I'm going to use history, I'm sorry. I know, I'll work on it. Some of the biggest problems businesses, service fields, and governments face involving major decisions are involving major decisions related to change, whether change that has been forced on them or change that they want to meet preemptively. There's no better teacher of change over time than the study of history. Historians learn that governments, technology, international relationships, workforces and demographics, styles, wealth, markets, and resources are all constantly changing. Historians are comfortable seeing change. They know it happens, they've seen it in the past, and they can even sometimes gauge where it will occur in the present. Employers like having employees who can prepare for, identify, appreciate, and react well to change, and who can help prepare a business or institution to weather or even benefit from it. While history majors can help their employers identify business trends and patterns, they can cite precedent from the past to help in making decisions for the present. They also know the value or the importance of context and historical contingency. Historians are valuable to business organizations and employers not only for their knowledge of the past, but also because they know not to view the past as a blueprint for the future. They recognize the complexity of factors that affect change and see historical precedent as a lesson, not a litmus test for present decisions. So all of these skills, verbal and written communication, empathy, creative thinking, appreciation of diversity, information literacy, and problem solving, and I feel like these are just some of them. They're all skills that humanities majors build every day in every course. And they also happen to be the skills that employers say they most desire in new employees, according to Forbes. So we are simply, by teaching our disciplines for the joy of the discipline, also teaching essential career skills. We just need to start emphasizing and saying explicitly Sorry. What we implicitly know we are providing for our students. We need to teach them and our colleagues and community that these are useful skills that our disciplines provide, and remind students that these skills are considered essential learning for workforce readiness and engaged citizenship in our global community. Really, the humanities teach us the skills for being better humans, and we could all benefit from a little more of that.
I'm told we have some time for questions, so if anyone has any questions for any of the panelists, please step up. If not, I've got one prepared, but I'd rather hear yours.
I had a quick one. It's the map that you used, and I want to steal it or borrow it for my class, but I don't know what that was.
It was it's the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool.
Can I steal it?
It's public.
Yes, hi. I had a question. So I was a humanities major, and I'm probably in my anthropology department. I was probably one of like 4 Black students, and I saw that in a lot of the images that you showed. They were mostly white, folks in the majors, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Are there things that you could say that speak to what are the unique reasons that, or what are the ways that we should be pitching this for people of color, and what can you say to the reasons that they don't tend to go into these majors, or that they're not attractive, in the same way?
And just to pile on to that, my daughter is in her freshman year at University of Maryland, College Park. She's in the Honors Humanities program. When they had an orientation for all the incoming students in Honors Humanities, or ho-hum as they call it. It was 63 women and 2 men. You couldn't help but notice the skew. So in terms of both race and sex, wondering if anyone would like to address that.
I'm not touching that.
A swing and a miss.
No, I'm joking, but go ahead.
So, that's a hard question that being a composition professor who teaches all the time has not prepared me to answer. But I would say that I encounter students all the time who want to, become social workers, right? Or they are unhappy with the criminal justice system, so now they're criminal justice majors, right? So they are trying to address something, and their career aspirations lead them are making them choose. And I think it goes back to pathways, what Paula was talking about. If we had a way to enable students to imagine how they could become advocates, and imagine how they get to various places, what those what would it mean to have a person of color managing a CVS? I don't know. Do you know what I mean? In the community, there might be a difference to be made there. And maybe you can be an English major and end up there and do some good. And that's all I can say. Yeah.
I can sort of try to chime in. I would say that there seems to be a shift that's occurring, and they've noted it in some of the data where they're asking, and I'm sorry, I'm coming just from history here, but they've asked students, graduate students, why are you becoming a historian? What is it that drew you to this field? Why do you want a career in this? And before, the answers were, I wanted to ask these questions, I have all of these research interests. Now it is, I see problems in the world and I want to advocate for change. So they are coming in ready to be social justice warriors. And they're studying history because that's how you do this. If you want to change the world, you need to know what happened before, and you need to know, you need to have that as your foundation before you can move forward. So we're seeing, I think, a shift in why people are starting to study the humanities, but, and again, history specifically. And I think that's going to change who you start to see studying. I think you're going to see more women. I think you're going to see more minorities of every type seeing this as a new pathway to make a change in their world. And I think that's also how we get more of those minority populations in the door, is to say, you want to make a change? Here's how you do it. These are courses that will help you to do that. And I think the other thing is to start seeing more of yourself, in whatever way that may be, in the faculty and in the leadership positions in these fields. So those would be my two thoughts.
We have one thought directly on this question, so.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Martha. I'm from Passaic County Community College. And I wanted to actually address the question that you had, because I think it's, the example of the two men in the humanities, I think, African American, people of color in general not being in like these kinds of quote unquote impractical majors, I think that plays a lot into that. So for example, my parents are immigrants. I mean, I was born a year after they came over from Poland. So when I told my father, you know what, I think I want to go on to graduate school and be a historian, he's like, what are you going to do? How are you going to make money? What's wrong with you? We don't have millions of dollars. We don't come from wealth. It almost seems, I think, in certain probably like environmental backgrounds, I think there's this idea that you need to make money. You need to do, and again, going back to the perceptions of the stereotypes, well, you can only make money if you're in STEM, or you can only make money if you major in business, right? And I think that's where it comes from. So I think the stereotypes still continue on. So people who are from socioeconomic backgrounds that are not wealthy, like myself, again, I'm a child of immigrants. I think there's still that notion that this is something that like gentlemen do, like the 19th century notion of the gentleman studying philosophy, right? It's like, well, you're obviously wealth. You come from wealth, and you have this. It's almost like a luxury or like a pleasure to do that. So that's my thinking.
Well, if I can add to this, I think that all we're saying is true, but this is one more reason why we need the humanities to be well, regarded at the community college level. This is why we need to finance our programs, and we need to advertise them rather than, again, welding, because a lot of underprivileged people are in the humanity colleges, and if we don't expose them to these things, probably they will go our entire life keep on thinking that philosophy is for, 19th century privileged individual, which it has been historically. I cannot lie about that, but it doesn't have to be. And it's not like this anymore. And it wasn't like this at the beginning, necessarily, right? But I think that that's one more reason why we need to stress the importance of our disciplines at a community college level.
Hello, my name is Christian Rodriguez. I'm from Raritan Valley Community College. My question stems from the skills and habits that Sarah highlighted, specifically the appreciation of diversity. So in each state workforce, there's a percentage for hiring processes. So you need to hire at least a certain amount of Black people or Hispanic Latino people or white people to build diversity within your campus or any workforce in general. So my question is, how do we have these real talks without, kind of any backlash? So, and what I mean by that is for students, right? If students want to speak up, they're scared about bills or grades that they might have with future professors in their classrooms, and a professor might not like what a student commented about, or a letter of recommendation. That professor might not write a letter of recommendation because they're scared of that professor. And then for faculty, staff, administration, some have tenure and they don't believe that they should go to the diversity trainings that are not required, but they can go to them. They're not required, but they have a better chance of not attending them because they're tenure and don't have to face the same consequences as adjunct professors or faculty, staff, and administration would have to go through. And then adjunct are scared to voice their opinions because they have the chance of getting fired or torn away from even their workforce. So and this opens it up for the whole panel, not just Sarah, but so how do we have these real conversations without having any backlash or having the fear of such, of getting fired or grades or letter of recommendations? Thank you.
I don't know that I can solve that for us. I think we need to start seeing college, and especially the humanities, for what it's always been meant to do. And here I'm getting ready to give you the full credit here, which is, we are here to be able to handle complicated and controversial ideas. That's the point of having a college education, in my mind, is to be able to grapple with these kinds of issues and talk about them and have this kind of academic and important discussion without fear of repercussions or losing something because of it. This should be the space where we get to do that. And I think that's something else that we have to make explicit about what we do here. And what these kinds of fields offer. And that is, we get to explore ideas, we get to have opinions, we get to back them up with evidence. We can't just come in and start, shooting our mouth off about things. But this is a space to try these ideas out, and we shouldn't be fearful about doing so. Students, adjuncts, faculty, doesn't matter. We should all be in here having these kinds of conversations. So maybe that's something where, the administration needs to back that and really sort of make sure that there is no backlash. I don't know, I'm not coming up with a good solution, but I think that this is why we are here, is to have that kind of conversation. I'll let somebody else maybe.
Well, I have like a partial answer to the adjunct side of things. It's a revolutionary idea about we don't have any adjuncts, so we have full-time faculty. So they don't need to be scared. How about we do that so they don't have to be worried about these things? I think I understand it's impractical because we don't have the money to do that. But then there's the question, where is the money?
If we're speaking from our disciplines, I'll speak as a political scientist for a second. There is no such thing as no backlash. That is not a thing. There is no leader who gets a 100% approval rating, ever, right? When Giuseppe threw the John Adams quote up there about, my son will study the humanities and so forth, John Adams passed the Sedition Act, right? This was a guy who clamped down on free speech because people were using it, as he saw it, wrongly. We have to accept there's going to be conflict. There's going to be, as Bettina put it, people's motivating narratives are going to be different. And that's okay, right? What we need to do, I think, as I'll speak as an administrator now, is to work consciously to create environments in which people can have those disagreements and they're not fatal. In which it's okay if your interpretation of a given quote or a given institution differs from mine, and we can have that conversation in a respectful but still pointed kind of way. That's, I think, the best we're going to get. I don't think we're going to get to 100% agreement because I think the only way you get to that is by force. And that's what we're seeing in Texas and Florida, where they're trying to actually push one narrative over all the other narratives by force of law. That, to me, is the real danger. I think in terms of administrators, I'll defend my tribe for a little bit. You want administrators who understand that the point of a college, right, is a collegium of scholars. It's getting people together to talk to each other. And that means there will be disagreement. And so you need to be able to not necessarily contain the disagreement, but contain the effects of the disagreement. So I don't mind being challenged by faculty when they have reasons. But to me, there's a difference between, okay, the way that you're constructing this budget is counterproductive. That's one thing. Versus you're evil and everyone like you is evil, which to me is a very different thing, right? And we need to, and I think in our larger politics, we've lost that distinction, right? So the long answer to the short question, I don't think we'll ever get to full agreement. I think what we need to do is come up with ways to handle disagreement that would allow everybody to be at the table and nobody to feel scared.
And we're hoping today is that place, one of those places to start that conversation. So thank you to our first panel. I know that we had to end before a lot of questions were answered and posted in the back, so I encourage you to continue your conversations, to come up to talk to the panelists. Right now, we're going to go into breakouts.